I'm sitting in my home office in Savannah, the kind of room that smells like old parchment and expensive bourbon, watching a cursor blink on a screen. It's a rhythmic, mocking little line that feels like a heartbeat, the only heartbeat left in this house. Outside, the Spanish moss hangs from the oak trees like tattered lace, beautiful and decaying at the same time. That's exactly what my life is right now, a high-end decay. Have you ever looked at your life and realized every single brick was laid on a lie? Have you ever loved someone so deeply that you became blind to the very person standing right in front of you? If you're listening to this from your car, your kitchen, or late at night in a bed that feels too big, tell me in the comments at what point does trust just become naivety? And please stick around, hit that subscribe button, because what I'm about to tell you is the only way I can make sure the truth outlives the lies. My name is Thatcher. I spend my days restoring old film, taking grainy, forgotten memories from the 50s and 60s and making them sharp again. I'm good at seeing what's hidden in the shadows of a frame. But for 7 years, I was completely blind to the woman sleeping 3 inches away from me. Maren was my everything. She was an executive at a top-tier architectural firm here in the city, the kind of woman who walked into a room and made the air feel more expensive. We had the life, the renovated historic townhouse on Jones Street, the weekend trips to Hilton Head, the shared laughter over Sunday brunch. She was the golden girl of our social circle, always the one hosting the charity drives and posting the most curated, heartwarming photos of us with captions like, forever isn't long enough. I believed it. Every single word. I worked late into the nights in my studio, painstakingly cleaning up other people's memories so I could provide more for our own. I thought we were a team. I thought we were building an empire of 2. But about 6 months ago, the frame started to skip. It started with small things. Maren started carrying her phone like it was a vital organ. She'd flip it face down the second I entered the kitchen. When I'd ask how her day was, she'd give me these rehearsed, glossy summaries that sounded more like a LinkedIn update than a conversation with a husband. But I pushed it down. I told myself she was stressed, that the high-stakes world of Savannah real estate was wearing her thin. I was the supportive husband. I was the guy who brought her lavender tea and rubbed her shoulders while she stared at her screen, never realizing that she was staring at a world I wasn't allowed to see. The glitch happened on a Tuesday, a humid, heavy Tuesday, where the air felt like a wet blanket. Maren had left her iPad on the coffee table while she went up to take one of her long, steaming showers. I was just going to move it so I didn't spill my coffee, but then the screen lit up. A notification from the recently deleted folder in the photo app. It was an automated system alert, a storage warning. Usually I'd ignore it, but as a film restorer, my brain is wired to manage data. I figured I'd just clear the trash for her so the device wouldn't lag. I opened the folder, and the world stopped turning. There were 3 videos. They weren't just clips, they were high-definition betrayals. The first one was filmed in a hotel room I didn't recognize. I saw Maren. She was wearing the red dress I bought her for our anniversary, but she wasn't with me. She was with a man I knew, Riker. He was a high-end contractor she'd been working with on the riverfront project, a guy who had sat at our dinner table and drank my bourbon. In the video, they weren't just together. Maren was holding the phone, filming them in the mirror, laughing. It wasn't the laughter I knew. It was a sharp, mocking sound. She looked at the camera and said, "Thatcher thinks I'm at a late-night site inspection. He's probably at home right now, syncing some boring black and white movie, thinking about our perfect future. He's so easy, it almost makes it boring." Riker laughed a deep guttural sound that made my skin crawl and whispered something into her ear that made her squeal with delight. She then looked back at the lens and said, "This one's for the collective. Watch and learn, girls." My hands weren't shaking yet. I was too cold for that. I felt like I'd been plunged into a frozen lake. I clicked the second video. This one was worse. It was filmed in our bedroom, my side of the bed. The lighting was dim, but I could see the framed photo of our wedding day on the nightstand in the background. Maren was propped up against the headboard, a glass of wine in her hand, narrating her life like she was a host of a twisted reality show. She was talking to her phone, her eyes bright with a sick kind of adrenaline. "So, update for the Hive," she whispered, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Archer, sorry, I mean Saint Thatcher, just sent me a bouquet of lilies to the office because I told him I had a headache. Lilies. He's so predictable. If he only knew that Riker was currently under the desk while I was taking that call. Can you imagine? The guy is a literal NPC in his own life. Honestly, the only reason I stay is because the house is paid off and his devotion makes for such great content for you guys. Who wants to see the next clip?" She wasn't just cheating. She was using my soul as a punchline. She was sharing the most intimate, painful parts of our lives with a group of people she called the collective Lenin Juno and the rest of her social climbing vultures. They weren't just her friends, they were her audience. My marriage wasn't a relationship, it was a production, a story time for a group of bored elitist sociopaths who feasted on the humiliation of a man who did nothing but love. I sat there on our Italian leather sofa, the iPad feeling like a radioactive brick in my hands. I could hear the water running upstairs. I could hear Maren humming a pop song. The contrast was so violent it felt physical. Down here my heart was being shredded into confetti, and up there she was washing the scent of another man off her skin so she could come down and kiss me goodnight. I looked at the third video. It was a screen recording of a group chat, The Collective. I scrolled through the messages. Lennon had written, "OMG Maren, the way he looks at you in those couple goals photos is hilarious now that we know." Juno replied, "He's like a loyal golden retriever that you keep kicking and he just keeps coming back with a ball. Post the clip from the car trip that was legendary." Maren's response, "I'll get more tomorrow. I told him we need us time this weekend. That usually gets him all emotional and talkative. I'll record the heart-to-heart so we can all have a laugh at brunch on Monday." That was the moment the loyal golden retriever died. Something else took its place. Something colder. Something that knew exactly how to handle film, how to edit a narrative, and how to wait for the perfect frame. I realized then that if I confronted her now, she'd play the victim. She'd cry, she'd delete the evidence, she'd turn the collective against me, and I'd be the unhinged ex-husband in her next viral story. In Savannah, reputation is everything. She had spent years building hers as a saint. She had spent years building mine as a fool. I looked up at the ceiling, listening to the water stop. I heard the shower door creak open. I heard her feet hit the floorboards I had spent 3 weeks sanding and staining by hand to make sure they were perfect for her bare feet. Every effort I had made, every sacrifice, every late night, it wasn't just unappreciated. It was weaponized against me. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't break the iPad. Instead, I did what I do best. I became a technician. I realized that if she wanted to turn our life into a show, I was going to make sure she got the series finale she deserved. I wasn't just going to leave her. I was going to archive her. I was going to document every single lie, every mocking laugh, every frame of her infidelity, until I had enough footage to build a prison made of pixels. I carefully closed the folder. I cleared the cache. I put the iPad back on the coffee table in the exact same position it had been in, tilted at a slight angle, reflecting the dim light of the floor lamp. I stood up and walked to the kitchen, my movements mechanical and fluid. I poured a glass of water, my hand steady as a rock. I could feel a strange icy clarity settling over me. The pain was still there, a massive throbbing weight in the center of my chest, but I pushed it behind a heavy steel door in my mind. I heard her footsteps on the stairs. They were light, rhythmic, and confident. The footsteps of a woman who thought she was invincible. The footsteps of a woman who thought her husband was a supporting character in her grand monologue. "Thatcher, honey." She called out, her voice, sweet and melodic, vibrating with that fake warmth she used for the world. "Is that you? Did you finish that 1940s reel?" I turned toward the doorway, leaning against the counter. I watched her emerge from the shadows of the hallway, wrapped in a white silk robe, her hair damp and smelling of expensive jasmine. She looked beautiful. She looked like a lie. She walked toward me, a playful smile on her lips, her eyes scanning my face for the usual signs of adoration she fed on. She reached out to touch my arm, her fingers cool and soft, the same fingers I had just watched caressing Riker in a mirror. I didn't flinch. I didn't pull away. I looked directly into her eyes, those bright, deceptive eyes. And for the first time in 7 years, I wasn't looking at my wife. I was looking at my subject. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning, a coldness that started in my fingertips and began to wrap itself around my spine as she leaned in to kiss my cheek. Her damp hair brushing against my skin like a cold, wet shroud. That silk robe felt like a layer of ice against my forearm, a stark contrast to the boiling fury I had just locked away behind my ribs. As Maren's lips brushed my cheek, the scent of that jasmine shampoo, the one I used to buy for her in bulk because I thought it was the scent of home, now smelled like a funeral wreath. I didn't pull away. I didn't even stiffen. I stood there like a statue in a graveyard, letting her perform the ritual of the loving wife, while my mind was already 3 steps ahead, calculating the storage capacity of my hidden servers. She pulled back her eyes, searching mine with that practiced predatory curiosity. She was looking for the golden retriever, the man who would melt at her touch, and ask her about her day with a pathetic wagging tail. I gave her exactly what she wanted. I forced my facial muscles into a weary, affectionate smile. I told her the 1940s reel was a nightmare of silver halide and vinegar syndrome, a technical disaster that would take me all night to fix. It was the perfect cover. In Savannah, everyone knows Thatcher spends his nights in the dark, fixing the broken past. It gave me the ultimate alibi to begin dismantling our present. As soon as she headed to the kitchen to pour her nightly glass of Pinot Grigio, I retreated into my studio. I locked the door, a habit she attributed to my artistic process, and sat down in the glow of 4 high-definition monitors. My heart was thumping a frantic rhythm against my chest, a stark contrast to the clinical stillness of the room. I felt like a double agent in my own house. I reached into the back of my primary workstation and pulled out a clean 5 terabyte external drive. I labeled it Project Ghost. The first step was the hardest, the digital heist. Maren was tech-savvy, but she was arrogant. She believed my expertise was limited to celluloid and chemicals, never imagining I understood the architecture of the cloud better than she understood her own blueprints. I sat there, my fingers flying over the keyboard, setting up a ghost sync. I didn't want to just copy her files. I wanted a mirror. I tapped into our shared home network, creating a silent bridge that would automatically divert every photo, every video, and every sent message from her devices directly onto my encrypted drive. As the progress bar crawled across the screen, I watched the thumbnails populate. It was like watching a slow-motion car crash involving my own soul. Each image was a new serrated edge. There were screenshots of her, the collective group chat, where Lennon and Juno were dissecting my personality like amateur surgeons. They laughed about the time I cried when our dog died. They mocked the way I'd save up for months to take Maren on surprise trips, calling them cliché and low rent. But the videos, the ones she hadn't deleted yet, were the true poison. I saw Riker again, and again, in the back of his truck, in the office at the construction site, even in the park where we had our first date. Maren was always the one directing the camera. She would zoom in on her own wedding ring, while Riker kissed her neck, a silent visual middle finger to the man who put it there. She wasn't just having an affair. She was curating a gallery of my betrayal. She was the director, and I was the unsuspecting, tragic comic relief. I spent the next 3 weeks living a double life that would have broken a weaker man. By day, I was the doting husband. I brought her coffee in bed. I listened to her complain about the stress of the riverfront project, knowing full well that stress was code for a midday rendezvous with Riker. I played the role so well that she became even more reckless. She started filming her confessionals while I was in the next room. I'd be sitting at the dinner table and she'd go into the pantry to get her napkins, only to pull out her phone and whisper a quick mocking update to The Hive about how dead inside I looked tonight. Little did she know I was listening to every word through the high-gain microphones I'd hidden in the crown molding. My studio became a war room. I stopped restoring old films and started restoring the truth. I began a process I called the archive. I wasn't just hoarding her sins, I was organizing them. I used my professional editing software to sync her secret videos with the GPS data from her car and the time-stamped messages from her group chat. I created a multicam timeline of her deception. In one window, I'd have the footage of her telling me she was working late. In the window next to it, I'd have the footage she sent to the collective of her and Riker at a bar in Midtown, laughing at my trusting nature. The emotional toll was a heavy, suffocating fog. There were nights when I'd sit in the dark, watching her face on the screen, the woman I had worshipped, and I'd have to grip the edge of the desk until my knuckles turned white to keep from screaming. The pain didn't go away, it just transformed. It turned into something cold and sharp like a diamond-tipped drill. I started to see Maren and Riker not as people but as assets in a very dark production. I began to analyze their patterns. Riker was the muscle, the ego. Maren was the brains, the ego. They both suffered from the same fatal flaw. They believed they were the smartest people in the room because they had no conscience. One night, about a month into my silent vigil, Maren came into the studio. I quickly toggled the screen to a clip of an old black and white wedding in the 1920s. She leaned over my shoulder, her scent, that jasmine and wine, filling my lungs like a toxin. "Still working on those ghosts, Thatcher?" she asked, her voice light and teasing. She ran a hand through my hair, a gesture that used to make me feel safe, but now felt like a snake slithering over my scalp. "Just trying to make sure the past stays where it belongs," I replied, my voice steady, eyes fixed on the flickering gray images on the monitor. "Some things are too important to let fade away." She laughed, that sharp melodic sound that I now realized was her performance voice. "You're such a romantic. It's almost sweet. Don't stay up too late. I'm going to head to bed. Big presentation tomorrow for the board." I knew what that presentation was. I had seen the messages. She was meeting Riker at an Airbnb in the historic district before the meeting. I watched her walk out of the room, her hips swaying with the confidence of someone who thought she had successfully erased her tracks. As soon as the door clicked shut, I went back to work. I found a new folder that had just finished uploading. It was a series of voice memos she had recorded for Lennon. In them, Maren was discussing her exit strategy. She wasn't just cheating, she was planning to bleed me dry. She talked about how she was going to wait until the riverfront project was finalized and her bonus was secured before filing for divorce. She planned to use my obsessive work habits and emotional distance as grounds to claim the house and a significant portion of my savings. "He's so wrapped up in his little film world, he won't see it coming until the papers are on his desk," she told Lennon. "The best part is he'll probably still try to apologize to me. He's that pathetic." I felt a strange surge of empowerment then. It was the moment the victim finally vanished. I wasn't a golden retriever being kicked. I was the architect of a slow-motion collapse. I started a new project file. I didn't call it documentary or revenge. I called it the art of the mask. I began to weave the narrative together. I wasn't just going to show her cheating. I was going to show the world exactly who she was, the mockery, the calculation, the absolute lack of human empathy. I realized I needed more than just her videos. I needed her, the collective, to feel the heat too. I started tracking Lennon and Juno. I found that they were just as rotten, using Maren's stories to fuel their own sense of superiority. They weren't just onlookers. They were enablers. They were the ones who suggested she film more daring clips. They were the ones who laughed when she described my pain. The humidity in Savannah started to break as autumn approached. but the air inside our house remained thick and stagnant. We went to a dinner party at Juno's house one Saturday night. I sat there sipping a sparkling water, watching the hive in their natural habitat. Maren was the star, of course. She was telling a story about a difficult client, but her eyes kept darting to Lennon and they'd share a secret, knowing smirk. I knew exactly what that smirk meant. It was about the video she had sent them that afternoon, a clip of me trying on a suit for a gala while she stood behind me making gagging faces at the camera. I sat there smiling politely, nodding at their vapid conversations about real estate and interior design. I felt like a ghost haunting my own life. I looked at these people I had hosted, people I had helped, people I had trusted, and I saw them for what they were, a pack of scavengers. I realized then that a simple divorce wouldn't be enough. Legal papers can be hidden. Lies can be reframed. In the age of the internet, the only real justice is permanence. I needed to ensure that when people searched for Maren, they didn't see the architect or the philanthropist. I wanted them to see the woman who laughed at her husband's soul. I wanted the first thing a future employer, a future partner, or even a stranger at a grocery store saw to be the raw, unedited truth of her character. I wanted to build a digital monument to her betrayal that no lawyer could ever tear down. I stayed up until 4 a.m. that night, long after Maren's breathing had turned deep and rhythmic in the other room. I was in the final stages of the edit. I had organized the footage into chapters. Chapter 1, The Facade. Chapter 2, The Inner Circle. Chapter 3, The Performance. I was using all my professional skills, color grading the footage to make the hotel rooms look cold and clinical, isolating the audio of her mocking whispers so they sounded like they were coming from inside your own head. I wasn't angry anymore. I was focused. I was a man polishing a lens and making sure that when the light finally hit it, the image would be so sharp it would cut anyone who looked at it. I began to look into hosting. I didn't want a platform that would take it down for harassment. I looked into decentralized servers, into sites that specialized in whistleblowing and social accountability. I wanted this to be a documentary of a social predator. The sun began to peek through the shutters of my studio, casting long, thin lines of light across the floorboards. I took a sip of cold coffee and hit save on the master file. It was over 3 hours of footage condensed into a searing 20-minute expose. It was the most honest piece of film I had ever produced. I stood up, my back popping from the hours of sitting, and walked to the window. I watched the fog lift off the Savannah River in the distance. The city was waking up, unaware that the golden couple of Jones Street was about to become the lead story in a very different kind of narrative. I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't felt in months. The weight was still there, but it was no longer crushing me. I was carrying it with purpose. I walked out of the studio and into the hallway. I could hear the shower starting upstairs. Maren was getting ready for another day of construction site inspections and board meetings. I walked into the kitchen and started the kettle. I moved with a strange, quiet grace, the grace of a man who no longer had anything to hide because he had already seen everything. As the water began to whistle, I heard her footsteps on the stairs, that same confident, rhythmic clicking of her heels. She came into the kitchen, already fully dressed in a sharp navy blazer, looking every bit the successful executive. She walked over to me, humming that same pop song, and reached for her travel mug. She didn't even look at me. She was already checking her phone, her thumb flicking across the screen with a speed that spoke of 1,000 secret messages. I leaned against the counter watching her. I didn't feel the urge to scream. I didn't feel the urge to cry. I just watched her thumb move, wondering which member of the collective she was entertaining this morning. She finally looked up, giving me a distracted, beautiful smile. "Good morning, honey," she said, her voice like honey poured over glass. "Did you finish your project?" I took a slow sip of my tea, feeling the warmth spread through my chest, and I let the silence hang in the air for a beat too long. I looked her right in the eyes, those eyes that had seen Riker, those eyes that had seen my pain and turned it into a joke, and I felt a cold final click in my mind. "Yeah, Maren," I said, my voice as calm as the river before a storm. "I finished it. It's exactly what it needs to be." She nodded, already turning back to her phone, completely unaware that the lens was now pointed directly at her. She grabbed her bag and headed for the door, throwing a "love you" over her shoulder as she vanished into the morning light. I stood there listening to the sound of her car pulling out of the driveway, the silence of the house settling around me like a heavy velvet curtain. I walked back toward my studio, my hand already reaching for the door handle, my mind focused on the final, irreversible upload. The door to my studio clicked shut with a finality that felt like the bolt on a tomb. The house was quiet now, the kind of heavy, suffocating silence that follows a long, drawn-out lie. I walked over to my desk, my footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors I'd polished just to see Maren's reflection in them. What a fool I had been admiring a reflection when the substance was already rotten. I sat down in the dark, the only light coming from the cool blue glow of my monitors. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the sheer kinetic energy of a man who was about to hit send on his own old life. This is the part they don't tell you about in the movies. They show the shouting, the thrown plates, the dramatic exits. They don't show the meticulous, soul-crushing labor of the silent technician. They don't show the hours spent staring at the person you loved, frame by frame, isolating the exact moment her eyes changed from wife to predator. Have you ever had to watch a video of your own heart being broken over and over again just to make sure the audio levels were perfect? Tell me in the comments, how much truth can a person take before they stop being a person and start being a weapon? If you're still here, if you're riding this dark wave with me, make sure you're subscribed, because the premiere is about to begin and there are no refunds once the lights go down. I opened the master file for The Art of the Mask. It sat there, a 42 gigabyte monster of high definition betrayal. I started the final render, the fans of my workstation whirring into a high-pitched scream as the processor ate through the data. I watched the progress bar, 1%, 2%, 3%. Each percentage point was a memory being cremated. I saw the thumbnails flash by Maren and Riker in the back of that truck. Maren laughing at the collective brunch. The way she looked at the camera with that chilling, empty superiority. I wasn't just making a revenge video. This was a masterpiece of social exposure. I had applied every color grading trick in the book. I made the scenes of our happy home life, warm and oversaturated, a sickeningly sweet yellow that felt like a cheap commercial. Then I cut to her secret footage, which I desaturated into a cold, clinical blue. I wanted the audience to feel the temperature drop. I wanted them to experience the whiplash of her personality. I isolated the audio from the hidden mics I'd placed in the pantry and the bedroom, cleaning up the hiss and hum until her mockery sounded like it was being whispered directly into the viewer's ear. "He's so predictable," her voice hissed through my studio monitors. I adjusted the EQ, pulling out the mid-tones so her cruelty sounded even sharper. "He's like a loyal golden retriever." I didn't flinch this time. I just nudged the slider on my console, deepening the bass of her laugh until it sounded demonic. I wasn't Thatcher the husband anymore. I was Thatcher the director, and my lead actress was about to have the biggest opening night of her life. While the render continued, I moved to the next phase of the production distribution. I knew that simply posting this on a public site wouldn't work. Maren's firm had high-priced lawyers. The collective had connections. They'd have it flagged and removed for privacy violations or harassment within an hour. I needed something that would stick. I needed the digital equivalent of permanent ink. I spent the next few hours navigating the deep architecture of the web. I bypassed the standard social media giants and looked for decentralized video platforms, sites hosted on servers across 3 different continents that didn't answer to American takedown notices. I created an anonymous account with a burner email and an encrypted VPN. But I didn't stop at a website. I created a press kit. I compiled a list of email addresses. I didn't just have Maren's parents and her sisters. I had the entire board of directors at her architectural firm. I had the city council members who were overseeing the riverfront project she was so proud of. I had the parents of the kids Lennon and Juno went to private school with. I had the HR department of every major developer in Savannah. I drafted a short, professional-looking cover letter. To whom it may concern. Enclosed is a documentary case study on corporate ethics, social manipulation, and the reality of the golden girl image in our city. We thought you might find the raw data relevant to your upcoming project milestones. I attached a password-protected link to the video. I set the password to be her birthday, a final poetic touch. By noon, the render was finished. The video was a seamless, terrifying journey through a sociopath's mind. It didn't just show her cheating, it showed her planning to financially ruin me while I slept. It showed her laughing about how she'd manipulate the court system to take the house. It showed the hive egging her on turning a man's life into a blood sport for their own entertainment. I felt a strange, hollow sense of accomplishment. The pain hadn't vanished, it had just become a tool. I was like a carpenter who had just finished building a gallows. I looked out the window. The Savannah sun was high and bright, casting sharp shadows across the street. People were walking their dogs. Tourists were taking photos of the historic homes, and Maren was likely at a high-stakes lunch, clinking glasses, with Riker under the table while discussing synergy with a client. I took the external drive and tucked it into my pocket. I had one more scene to film for the prologue. I drove down to the riverfront, the area Maren was redesigning. It was a massive construction site, a skeleton of steel and concrete rising against the water. I parked a block away and walked to the perimeter fence. I saw Riker's truck, the black Ford Raptor that had featured so prominently in the videos. He was standing near a crane, wearing a hard hat, looking like the hero of some blue-collar romance novel. Maren was there too. She was wearing a white hard hat that looked pristine, holding a set of blueprints. She looked radiant. I pulled out my phone and started recording, not to confront them, but to capture the before. I watched them through the lens. They looked so confident. They looked like they owned the world. I saw Riker place a hand on the small of her back, a gesture that was supposed to be professional, but lingered a second too long. Maren leaned into it, a small, triumphant smile on her face. Action, I thought. I walked back to my car, my heart beating with a cold, steady rhythm. I drove to a quiet park on the edge of the city, away from the prying eyes of Jones Street. I sat on a bench and opened my laptop, tethering it to a secure hotspot. I looked at the email draft. One click. That's all it would take to burn it all down. I thought about our wedding day. I thought about the way she used to look at me, or the way I thought she looked at me. I realized that the woman I married was a character she had created to secure a lifestyle. She had never been real. The only thing real about Maren was the cold, calculating woman I had seen in those recently deleted files. I felt a sudden sharp pang of loneliness. It was the realization that I was about to be truly alone. Once the smoke cleared, there would be no Maren, no social circle, no golden couple life. Just me and the ruins. But then I remembered her voice on the voice memo calling me pathetic. I remembered Lennon laughing at my tears. The loneliness turned into a hard, diamond-like resolve. I hit send. I didn't just send it to the board. I sent it to the local news tips line. I sent it to the Savannah lifestyle bloggers who had featured our house in their Home of the Month segment. I sent it to the university where she sat on the alumni board. Then I did the most content creator thing I could think of. I uploaded the teaser, the most jarring 60 seconds of the documentary, to a public video sharing site with every SEO tag. Imaginable hashtag Savannah Real Estate, hashtag Maren, hashtag Betrayal, hashtag The Collective, hashtag Riker Construction, hashtag Socialite Scandal. I watched the sent folders empty out. It was done. The digital virus was out in the world and there was no vaccine for the truth. I shut my laptop and sat there for a long time watching the wind move through the trees. I felt like I was floating. I'd spent months submerged in her filth and now I was finally above the surface. I looked at my watch. It was 3 p.m. Maren's board meeting was scheduled for 4 p.m. The board members would be checking their emails right about now, preparing for her presentation. I drove back to our house. I didn't want to be there when the explosion happened, but I needed to pack a bag. I walked through the rooms, looking at the art we'd collected, the furniture I'd paid for, the life we'd staged. It all looked like props now. I grabbed a duffel bag and threw in my clothes, my passport, and my hard drives, the only things that mattered. I left her wedding ring on the kitchen counter, right next to the floral arrangement I'd bought her the day before. I didn't leave a note. The video was my note. As I was walking out the door, my phone started to vibrate. It was a text from Maren. Board meeting got pushed back 30 minutes. Boardroom is weirdly quiet today. Everyone is staring at their laptops. Anyway, love you. See you for dinner at 7. I didn't reply. I just looked at the screen until it went dark. I got into my car and started the engine. I began to drive not toward the riverfront, but toward the highway that led out of the state. I didn't have a destination yet, but I knew I couldn't be in Savannah when the documentary reached its climax. I turned on the radio, but the music sounded thin and meaningless. About 20 miles outside the city, my phone exploded. Calls from Maren, calls from Riker, calls from numbers I didn't recognize. I ignored them all. Then the messages started flooding in. Thatcher, what did you do? Maren, delete it now or I'll kill you. Riker, we're being fired. The board just saw it. Thatcher, please, this isn't funny. Maren, I pulled over at a rest stop, my hands finally starting to shake with the adrenaline of the kill. I opened my laptop one last time. I checked the views on the public teaser. 10,000 views. 20,000 views. It was spreading through the Savannah social circles like a wildfire in a dry forest. The comments were already a bloodbath. I knew she was fake, but this is next level evil. The husband is a legend for this. Wait, is that Riker from the construction site? His wife needs to see this. I saw a notification from a local news producer. Thatcher, we've seen the footage. Can you confirm the authenticity? We're running a story on the Riverfront project scandal tonight. I felt a grim sense of satisfaction. It wasn't just a divorce, it was an erasure. Maren's career was over. Riker's business was toast. The collective's reputations were being shredded in real time as people recognized their voices and faces in the documentary. I had turned their entertainment into their obituary. I looked at a photo of Maren I still had on my desktop, one from our honeymoon in Italy. She was smiling, her eyes crinkled with what I thought was joy. I realized then that she probably was joyful, that she had successfully trapped a man who would provide her with everything while she gave him nothing but a shadow. I deleted the photo. I felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to be somewhere else. Somewhere where nobody knew my name, where nobody knew about the golden couple, and where the air didn't smell like jasmine and betrayal. I put the car in gear and merged back onto the highway. The sun was starting to set, painting the sky in bruised purples and angry oranges. I looked at the rearview mirror, watching the silhouette of Savannah fade into the distance. I thought about Maren standing in that boardroom, the light from the projector hitting her face as her own voice mocked her from the speakers. I thought about her realization that she wasn't the director anymore. I reached out and turned off my phone, the screen flashing one last time with a desperate incoming call from Maren before the blackness took over. I tossed the device onto the passenger seat and gripped the steering wheel, my eyes fixed on the long gray ribbon of the road ahead, as the first few drops of a cold evening rain began to smear against the windshield. The rain isn't like the movies. It doesn't wash anything away. It just turns the dust of your past into a thick, suffocating mud. As those first drops smeared across my windshield, I felt the phantom vibration of my phone on the passenger seat, even though the screen was a dead black void. It was like a severed limb that still itches. My hands were clamped so tight on the steering wheel that my knuckles looked like polished bone. I was driving away from a life that had exploded behind me, but the shrapnel. The memories of Maren's laughter, the way she used to tuck her hair behind her ear before telling a lie, was still embedded in my skin. Before I go any further, I have to ask you something. When does justice become cruelty? I've seen your comments on the last part. Some of you are cheering for the burn, while others are asking if I went too far by making her infamy permanent. Where do you draw the line? If someone records your soul to mock it, do you owe them a quiet exit? Drop a yes or no in the comments. I need to know if I'm the hero of this story or just the last villain standing. And if you've stuck with me through the shadows, hit that subscribe button. This is the end of the reel. I pulled into a neon-lit diner somewhere near the Georgia-South Carolina border. The air inside smelled of grease and burnt coffee, a grounded, honest smell that didn't try to hide behind jasmine perfume. I opened my laptop, the screen reflecting in my tired eyes. The internet doesn't sleep, and it definitely doesn't forgive. My documentary hadn't just gone viral, it had become a digital wildfire. Local news outlets in Savannah were now running segments titled "The Riverfront Deception." They had reached out to the architectural firm, and the statement they released was clinical. Maren has been relieved of her duties effective immediately. We do not condone the predatory social behaviors exhibited in the leaked footage. But it wasn't just her job. Riker's construction firm was being bombarded with one-star reviews, citing unethical leadership. His wife, I saw a post from her on a local forum, had already moved her things out. And the collective, Lennon and Juno, had deleted their social media accounts, but the internet had already archived their faces. They were being doxxed by a public that was tired of elitist cruelty. I had pulled the thread, and the entire sweater of Savannah's high society was unraveling. I felt a strange detached hollow in my gut. It wasn't regret. It was the realization that I had spent months building a cage for Maren, and now that she was in it, I didn't know who I was supposed to be without the anger. I looked at the teaser video again. 500,000 views. People were dissecting every frame, every mocking word she said. She was no longer a person. She was a cautionary tale, a meme, a permanent search result. I opened a private browser and searched her name, Maren Savannah. The first result wasn't her professional portfolio. It was the video. The second result was a Reddit thread titled "The Maren Scandal: How to Spot a Sociopath Spouse." The third was a news clip. I had succeeded. I had given her exactly what she wanted, global attention. But instead of being the star of her own curated sitcom, she was the antagonist in a tragedy she couldn't edit. I thought about the legal fallout. I knew she'd try to sue. But I had been careful. I didn't post revenge porn. I posted a documentary of social fraud. I had used footage she had intentionally shared with others, footage she had failed to protect, and I had framed it as an expose on character. In the US, the truth is a powerful defense, but the public record is an even more powerful prison. Even if a judge ordered a link removed here or there, the digital footprint is eternal. Thousands of people had already downloaded it. It was on hard drives in Europe, servers in Asia, and in the minds of everyone who had ever envied her. I stayed at a cheap motel that night, the kind with thin walls and a flickering no vacancy sign. I lay on the bed, staring at the popcorn ceiling, listening to the muffled sound of a distant highway. For the first time in 7 years, I didn't have to wonder what Maren was doing. I didn't have to guess who she was texting or what she was laughing at. The silence was terrifying, but it was clean. A few days later, I received an email from an attorney. Not hers, but a mediator. Maren wanted a private settlement. She was willing to sign over the house, the savings, everything if I would just take it down. I replied with 4 words, "The internet is forever." I didn't want the house. I didn't want the money that was stained with her lies. I told the mediator to sell the property and donate the proceeds to a charity for victims of domestic emotional abuse. I didn't want a single brick of that life following me. I was Thatcher, the man who fixed broken films, and I was finally working on my own restoration. I moved to a small town in the Pacific Northwest, a place where the trees are taller than the scandals and the fog feels like a fresh start. I opened a small shop, not for film restoration, but for analog photography. There's something about a physical negative, something you can hold in your hand, something that can't be easily manipulated by a group chat that feels right to me now. Sometimes late at night I get a notification, a new comment on the video, a new person discovering the Maren scandal. I see people debating the morality of what I did. Some call me a legend. Others call me bitter. I don't reply to any of them. The art has to stand on its own. I learned a hard lesson in that dark studio in Savannah. Trust isn't something you give, it's something you protect. And once it's shattered, you can either spend your life trying to glue the pieces back together, or you can use those shards to cut your way out of the trap. I chose the shards. I looked at my reflection in the window of my new shop today. I don't look like the golden retriever anymore. There's a hardness in my eyes, a line around my mouth that wasn't there before. I'm a survivor of a very modern kind of war. I lost my home, my wife, and my reputation as a nice guy. But I gained the one thing Maren will never have again, a life built on the truth. As the sun sets over the mountains here, far away from the Spanish moss and the humid secrets of Georgia, I realize that the best revenge isn't the video. It isn't her losing her job or her friends. The best revenge is the fact that I can finally close my eyes and not see her director's chair. I'm not a character in her story anymore. I'm the narrator of my own. To those of you who have stayed until the final frame, thank you for being my witnesses. Life isn't always a happily ever after. And sometimes the hero has to get his hands dirty to find the light. If you've ever been the punchline in someone else's joke, just remember you're the one who holds the camera in the end. I reached out and closed the lid of my laptop, the small Apple logo glowing like a fading star in the twilight. I stood up, walked to the door of my shop, and turned the sign to closed. I stepped out into the crisp, pine-scented air, took a deep breath of the mountain wind, and started walking toward the trail that led away from the town, leaving the digital world and Maren in the dark where they belonged.